Arthur, please, help me!
Evie, stay with me. I've got you.
Don't leave me, I'm scared! You walked past me!
I lay on the cold marble floor, my custom white lace gown soaking up a spreading pool of crimson. The man who had just vowed to protect me forever stepped right over my shattered body, only to carry her to safety. 3 days later, he finally returned, but his confession destroyed everything. The morning of my wedding was the kind of perfect you only read about in overly optimistic romance novels. The California sun was spilling golden light across the sprawling lawns of the Hawthorne estate, a 19th century manor my mother had booked 2 years in advance. I was sitting in the bridal suite, staring at my reflection while my best friend and maid of honor, Jessica, pinned the last of the diamond hairpieces into my curls. "You look like a literal angel, Maddie," Jessica whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Arthur is going to absolutely lose his mind when he sees you." I smiled, a flutter of nervous butterflies dancing in my stomach. Arthur and I had been together for 4 years. He was a charming, ambitious architect who swept me off my feet with his grand romantic gestures and endless promises of a picture-perfect future. My dress, a breathtaking custom silk A-line with intricate French lace and a dramatic cathedral train, made me feel invincible. I felt safe. I felt loved. The ceremony was a blur of happy tears and whispered promises. Standing under a massive floral arch woven with white roses and eucalyptus, Arthur held my hands tightly. His eyes, the deep hazel I had fallen in love with, locked onto mine. "Madeline, I promise to be your shield in the storm, your partner in every trial, and your faithful husband until my last breath," he recited, his voice cracking with what I thought was genuine emotion. The applause from our 300 guests echoed through the gardens. We were officially husband and wife. The reception was held inside the estate's grand conservatory, a massive, historic glass structure supported by ornate, dark iron beams. It was breathtaking. The stars twinkled through the glass ceiling above us as we danced our first dance to Etta James. Everything was flawless, right down to the vintage champagne and the laughter ringing in the air. But looking back, found there were cracks in the foundation of that perfect night. During the toast, I noticed a woman standing near the back, by the carved ice sculpture. It was Evelyn. Arthur had introduced her to me months ago as a junior associate at his firm. She was striking tall, with sleek blonde hair and a perpetual pout, but she always gave me an icy chill. I had explicitly asked Arthur not to invite her, feeling uneasy about the late-night texts and emergency work dinners they shared. He had laughed it off, calling me paranoid, and insisted she needed a +1 to the wedding because she was going through a rough breakup. Yet, there she was, standing alone, her eyes fixed entirely on my husband. Around 10:30 p.m., the atmosphere shifted. A freak, unseasonal storm rolled in from the coast with terrifying speed. At first, it was just the heavy patter of rain against the conservatory glass, which only added to the romantic ambiance. But then, the wind began to howl, violently shaking the antique iron frames. I was standing near the center of the dance floor, laughing with Jessica and my uncle, when the unthinkable happened. A deafening crack echoed above the music. The DJ abruptly cut the sound. Everyone looked up just in time to see the central support beam of the grand chandelier. A massive, heavy, wrought iron fixture dripping with crystals give way. "Maddie, look out!" Jessica screamed, lunging toward me. I didn't have time to react. The ceiling above us imploded. A terrifying shower of thick glass and heavy metal rained down. I felt a crushing weight slam into my right side, throwing me violently to the marble floor. The sound of shattering glass and screaming guests filled the air, merging into a chaotic, terrifying symphony. Pain, blinding and absolute, erupted in my abdomen and right leg. I gasped for air, but my lungs felt paralyzed. I blinked through the dust and debris, my vision swimming. When I finally looked down, a scream lodged in my throat. A large, jagged shard of iron and glass from the chandelier had pierced straight through the delicate silk of my wedding dress, burying itself deep into my side. Blood, so much blood, was already pooling onto the white fabric, spreading like a horrific watercolor painting. "Arthur," I choked out, my voice a pathetic, gurgling rasp. "Arthur, please." Through the haze of dust and panic, I saw him. He was only 20 feet away, having been near the bar when the ceiling collapsed. He was completely unharmed. Our eyes met. Relief washed over me for a fraction of a second. My husband is safe. He's going to save me. He started sprinting toward the center of the room. I reached out a trembling, blood-soaked hand toward him. Arthur! But he didn't stop for me. He didn't even break his stride as he stepped right past my bleeding, shattered body. Time seemed to slow down to a crawl. I turned my head, agonizing pain shooting up my spine, to watch my husband drop to his knees beside another woman. It was Evelyn. A small piece of glass had grazed her shoulder, and she was sitting on the floor, crying hysterically, clutching her arm. "I've got you, Evie. I've got you, baby. You're okay," Arthur yelled, his voice laced with a raw, desperate terror I had never heard before. He scooped her up into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest, shielding her from the falling dust. "Arthur?" I whispered, coughing up a spatter of metallic-tasting blood. He didn't look back. The man who had sworn to protect me just hours earlier kicked aside a piece of my torn wedding veil to clear a path, carrying his mistress out of the ruined conservatory and into the night. The last thing I remember before the darkness took me was Jessica dropping to her knees beside me, her hands pressing desperately against my gaping wound, screaming for a medic while my blood soaked through her blush-pink bridesmaid dress. The next time I opened my eyes, I wasn't in a fairy tale grand estate. I was submerged in a sterile, blindingly white hospital room. The rhythmic, agonizing beep of a heart monitor was the only sound tethering me to reality. The smell of strong antiseptic made my stomach churn. I tried to move, but a fiery, white-hot agony flared in my abdomen. I gasped, choking on the dry air. "Maddie? Oh my God, Maddie, you're awake. Don't move, please don't move." I rolled my heavy head to the left. Jessica was slumped in an uncomfortable vinyl chair beside my bed. She looked utterly wrecked. Her hair was a tangled mess. Dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes, and she was wearing a pair of oversized hospital scrubs. "Jess." My voice was barely a croak. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. "I'm here, sweetie. I'm right here," she said, grabbing my hand gently. "You've been in and out for 2 days. You had a massive internal hemorrhage. Doctor, Harrison had to operate for 6 hours to repair your spleen and remove the shrapnel from your leg. You almost died on the marble floor, Maddie." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes as the memories came rushing back with sickening clarity. The storm, the glass, the blood. "Arthur. Where is he?" I whispered, my heart rate spiking on the monitor beside me. "Where is Arthur?" Jessica's face hardened. A profound, simmering rage flickered behind her exhausted eyes. She looked away, staring at the blank wall opposite my bed. "Jess, where is my husband?" I demanded, wincing as the effort pulled at my stitches. "He's not here, Maddie," she said quietly, the words dropping like lead weights onto my chest. "He hasn't been here." "What do you mean?" Panic began to set in. Was he hurt? Did something happen to him in the storm? Jessica took a deep, shuddering breath and squeezed my hand. "No, he's perfectly fine." When the paramedics arrived at the venue, Arthur forced his way into the first ambulance, with Evelyn. She had a superficial cut on her shoulder and a twisted ankle. The paramedics told him he couldn't ride with her because there were critical patients. "You were critical, Maddie." But he screamed at them, told them he was her fiancé, and refused to leave her side. A cold, numbing sensation spread from my chest to my fingertips. He said he was her fiancé? "I heard it myself," Jessica spat, a tear of pure anger slipping down her cheek. "I was screaming at him that his wife was bleeding out on the floor. He looked right at me, Maddie. He looked right at me, holding his bloody hands up, and said, 'I have to make sure she's safe.'" Then the ambulance doors closed, and he drove off with her. For the next 24 hours, making it 3 full days since I walked down the aisle, I lay trapped in that hospital bed, suffocating in a prison of my own shattered mind. The physical pain of my stapled abdomen and shredded leg was nothing compared to the violent betrayal tearing my soul apart. I asked Jessica to bring me my phone, which had been recovered from the bridal suite. My hands shook as I unlocked it. Nothing. Not a single text. Not a single missed call from Arthur. Instead, I opened social media. My timeline was a grotesque mixture of well wishes from terrified wedding guests, news articles about the tragic Hawthorne estate collapse, and then something else. I navigated to Evelyn's page. It wasn't private. Her latest post, uploaded just 12 hours ago, was a photo of her resting in a plush, luxurious hotel bed, a bandage neatly taped over her shoulder. Sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a cup of tea for her, was Arthur. The caption read, "Surviving the storm with my rock. I don't know what I'd do without him. Number blessed, number true love." I didn't cry. I think the shock had completely short-circuited my tear ducts. A cold, absolute void replaced the love I had harbored for the man I married. Evelyn wasn't just a coworker. She wasn't a mistake. She was his actual life, and I was just the prop he used for the cameras. On the afternoon of the third day, the heavy wooden door to my hospital room slowly creaked open. I turned my head. There he was, Arthur. He was wearing a crisp, clean designer shirt and jeans. He didn't look like a man who had spent 3 days worrying about his dying wife. He looked slightly inconvenienced, holding a bouquet of cheap, wilted hospital gift shop daisies. He stepped into the room, hesitating near the foot of my bed. He didn't rush to my side. He didn't fall to his knees begging for forgiveness. He just stood there, looking at the massive bandages wrapping my body. "Hey," he said, his voice casual, as if we were bumping into each other at a coffee shop instead of a trauma ward. "You look rough. The doctors say you're going to pull through, though." I stared at him. The man I had shared a home with, shared my dreams with, felt like a complete stranger wearing a familiar mask. "You left me," I stated, my voice eerily calm, stripping away any emotion. "I was bleeding to death in my wedding dress, and you stepped over my body." Arthur sighed, rubbing the back of his neck like a petulant child being scolded. "Look, Maddie, it was chaos, pure panic. My instincts just kicked in, all right? Evelyn is fragile. You've always been the strong one. I knew you'd hold on until the medics got to you. You've always been the strong one." The sheer audacity of his words made my blood turn to ice. "Get out," I whispered. "Maddie, be reasonable." "I'm here now," he said, stepping closer, dropping the pitiful daisies onto the rolling tray. "But we need to talk. Seriously talk. About the paperwork." "The paperwork?" I echoed, my brow furrowing in confusion. Arthur cleared his throat, pulling a manila folder from the inside pocket of his jacket. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. His eyes were cold, calculating, the near-death experience. "It put a lot of things into perspective for me," Arthur said smoothly, as if reciting a rehearsed corporate speech. "I can't live a lie anymore. Evie is pregnant. She's 3 months along. I was going to tell you after the honeymoon, but obviously, things have accelerated." He tossed the folder onto my lap, right over my agonizing surgical wounds. "I brought the annulment papers. Since the marriage was barely consummated and lasted less than an hour before the accident, my lawyer says it's a clean break. But I also included a document regarding the joint trust fund your grandfather set up. We merged the accounts the morning of the wedding, remember? I need you to sign the release form so I can retain my half. Evie and I are going to need the capital to secure a house before the baby comes." I stared down at the crisp white documents resting on my broken body. He didn't just come to leave me. He came to rob me blind, to fund his life with his mistress. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating, before a low, dark laugh bubbled up from the back of my throat. "You want my money?" I asked, looking up to meet his arrogant gaze. "You left me to die, and you want my grandfather's money?" Arthur crossed his arms. "It's legally half mine now, Madeline. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Just sign the papers and I'll walk away." I slowly reached for the pen resting on the tray beside the daisies. Arthur's lips curved into a smug, victorious half-smile. He thought I was broken. He thought the obedient, loving wife he had manipulated for 4 years was going to roll over and surrender. But the woman he married died on that marble floor. The woman looking back at him was someone else entirely. I held the cheap plastic hospital pen suspended over the thick stack of documents Arthur had so brazenly tossed onto my lap. He was practically vibrating with anticipation, his eyes locked on the tip of the pen, already spending the hundreds of thousands of dollars he believed were just a signature away. He didn't care that I was hooked up to a morphine drip, nor did he care about the grotesque purple bruises covering my arms. All he saw was a payday. I took a deep, rattling breath, ignoring the sharp stab of pain in my ribs. I flipped to the first document, the annulment. Without a second thought, I scrawled my name across the bottom line. I wanted this man severed from my life, like the infected tumor he was. "Good. Now the financial release," Arthur prompted, his tone patronizing, as if coaxing a toddler to finish their vegetables. Page 7. Just sign at the bottom, Maddie, and we can both move on with our lives. I flipped to page 7. The legal jargon was dense, but the bold heading was clear. Irrevocable transfer of joint assets. It pertained to the account my grandfather, a man who had worked 50 years in the steel industry to build a nest egg for me, had established. Arthur and I had consolidated our finances just 24 hours before the wedding, a gesture of ultimate trust he had relentlessly pushed for. I looked up from the paper, my eyes meeting his. You know, Arthur, laying here for 3 days gives a person a lot of time to think. Mostly about how lucky I am to be alive. Maddie, please, spare me the melodrama, he sighed, checking his silver Rolex, a birthday gift I had bought him the year prior. Evelyn is waiting in the car, and she's dealing with severe morning sickness. Just sign the damn paper. I gripped the top and bottom of the heavy parchment, and with a sudden, violent yank, I tore the financial release document straight down the middle. The sound of ripping paper echoed like a gunshot in the quiet hospital room. Arthur physically recoiled, his jaw dropping in stunned disbelief. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he exploded, his meticulously crafted calm shattering instantly. He lunged forward, trying to salvage the ruined document, but I threw the torn halves onto the floor, scattering them across the sterile linoleum. "What's wrong with me is that I finally see you," I whispered, my voice trembling not with fear, but with a volcanic rage. "You will get your annulment, Arthur. But you will not get a single dime of my grandfather's money. You can take your pregnant mistress and walk out of this hospital, or I will hit this call button and tell security you are physically threatening me." Arthur's face twisted into an ugly, mottled red mask of pure fury. The handsome, charming architect I had loved vanished, replaced by a desperate, cornered rat. He leaned over the bed, his face inches from mine, smelling faintly of Evelyn's cloying vanilla perfume. "You think you're so smart, Maddie? We merged the accounts. That money is legally in a joint trust. I don't need your signature to tie it up in litigation for years. I will bleed you dry in court. You're broken, you're weak, and you have nothing." He spun on his heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the heavy wooden door so hard the framed medical posters on the wall rattled. The moment he was gone, my brave facade crumbled. A sob tore its way out of my throat, aggravating my stitches. Jessica burst into the room seconds later, having been waiting by the nurse's station. She rushed to my side, her face pale with worry. I heard shouting. "What did he do? Did he hurt you?" she demanded, frantically checking my monitors. "He wants my money, Jess," I choked out, tears finally spilling hot and fast down my cheeks. "He's trying to take everything. He's trying to ruin me." Jessica's eyes narrowed, a fierce, protective fire burning in them. She picked up the torn pieces of the financial release from the floor and threw them into the trash can. "He isn't going to take a damn thing from you. We are going to destroy him, Maddie. But we need help." That afternoon, Jessica made a phone call to her older sister's college roommate, Victoria Lawson. Victoria was a notoriously ruthless divorce and civil litigation attorney in downtown Los Angeles. She was the kind of lawyer who wore tailored power suits, drank her coffee black, and made grown men cry during depositions. When Jessica explained the situation, Victoria cleared her schedule and was sitting in my hospital room by 8 a.m. the next morning. "So, the husband abandons the dying bride, runs off with the pregnant mistress, and then tries to extort the victim while she's bleeding on a gurney," Victoria summarized, tapping an expensive fountain pen against her leather notepad. "It's vile, but emotionally, a judge might just see a messy breakup. We need leverage. We need to know why he's so desperate for your specific trust fund, because his architecture salary should be more than enough to buy a house." I signed over power of attorney and gave Victoria full access to investigate my newly merged accounts. For the next 2 weeks, while I endured agonizing physical therapy to learn how to walk again with a shattered leg, Victoria went to work. What she uncovered was worse than a simple affair. Arthur wasn't just a cheating coward, he was a criminal. "I tracked the withdrawals," Victoria explained over a secure video call a fortnight later, her eyes gleaming with predatory excitement. "Arthur has a massive, hidden gambling addiction. He's been funneling money into offshore crypto casinos. He is $3 million in debt to some very dangerous people. But here is the kicker, Maddie." I leaned closer to the screen, gripping my physical therapy cane. "What is it?" "To cover his tracks, he's been embezzling from his own firm. Victoria said with a sharp smile. And guess who the junior associate managing the corrupted ledgers is? Evelyn. The physical recovery was a grueling, hellish nightmare. Every step I took with my metal cane sent shockwaves of blinding pain up my right thigh. My torso was bound in tight medical corsets, and I was restricted to a diet of bland liquids and painkillers. But the psychological healing? That was instantaneous the moment Victoria showed me the evidence of Arthur and Evelyn's embezzlement. The grief evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to orchestrate their absolute downfall. Arthur had been relentlessly harassing me for weeks. My phone was flooded with passive-aggressive texts, alternating between pathetic begging and vicious threats regarding the joint trust. He had hired his own sleazy attorney, demanding mediation. I played the part of the broken, terrified ex-wife flawlessly. I sent short, timid replies, begging for more time, acting as if the trauma had rendered me incapable of making a rational decision. Meanwhile, Victoria and I were quietly assembling a bomb. We compiled hundreds of pages of bank statements, encrypted emails, and forged invoices that proved Arthur and Evelyn had siphoned nearly $500,000 from Crescent and Hayes Architecture. The senior partner, Gregory Hayes, was a notoriously strict, old-money patriarch who treated his firm like a sacred institution. He had mentored Arthur, treating him like a son. If we just hand this over to the police, Arthur and Evelyn get arrested quietly, Victoria reasoned, sitting across from me in my living room, watching me ice my leg. They go to jail, but they still get to control the narrative. They'll spin it. They'll claim you framed them out of jealousy. No, I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet harder than steel. I don't want quiet. He humiliated me in front of 300 people. He left me to bleed out in a glass cage. I want his destruction to be as public and as devastating as what he did to me. Victoria's lips curved into a wicked grin. Then I know exactly where we drop the bomb. Every year, Crescent and Hayes hosted a massive, high-profile quarterly shareholder meeting and gala at the Wilshire Grand Center. It was an event attended by the firm's biggest clients, wealthy investors, and local politicians. Arthur had been bragging for months that he was slated to give the keynote presentation this year, a speech that was supposed to secure his promotion to junior partner. Evelyn, naturally, would be right by his side. The day of the gala arrived. It had been exactly 45 days since the ceiling collapsed on my wedding day. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror. I wasn't wearing white. I chose a striking, blood-red tailored pantsuit that hid the bulky bandages around my torso but commanded absolute attention. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, unforgiving ponytail. I gripped my black mahogany walking cane, a necessity, but also an accessory of pure authority. Jessica stood behind me, adjusting my collar. "You look like a villain in a movie, and I am entirely here for it," Jessica whispered, her eyes shining with fierce pride. "I'm not the villain, Jess," I replied, meeting my own cold gaze in the mirror. "I'm the karma he forgot to account for." We arrived at the Wilshire Grand Center at exactly 2 p.m. The main ballroom was packed with over 200 of the city's most elite business figures. Through the heavy oak double doors, I could hear Arthur's voice projecting through the microphone. He was smooth, charismatic, and dripping with that fake, humble charm I had once fallen for. Victoria met us in the lobby. She handed me a thick, black leather binder. Inside were the printed copies of the embezzlement evidence, perfectly tabbed and highlighted. She had already couriered a duplicate copy directly to Gregory Hayes's private office that morning, timed perfectly, so he would be reading it right as this meeting began. "Gregory Hayes is in the front row. He received the package 20 minutes ago," Victoria confirmed, checking her watch. "The stage is yours, Madeline." I pushed open the heavy oak doors. The hinges let out a low, echoing groan, but the sound was drowned out by Arthur's speech about integrity and building a future of trust. I stepped into the grand ballroom. The rhythmic, heavy thud, click of my cane hitting the hardwood floor caught the attention of the people in the back rows. Heads began to turn. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a sudden wave. Arthur was standing on the illuminated stage, gesturing toward a massive projection screen showing architectural blueprints. Evelyn was seated in the front row VIP section, wearing a designer maternity dress, looking bored and arrogant. As I walked down the center aisle, the whispers turned into loud gasps. Many of the people in this room had been at my wedding. They recognized me. They knew I had nearly died. Seeing me stride into the room in a blood-red suit, leaning heavily on a cane, completely derailed the event. Arthur froze. The laser pointer in his hand trembled, the red dot dancing erratically across the projector screen. His mouth opened, but his smooth, rehearsed words vanished. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. Evelyn turned around in her seat. All the color instantly drained from her perfectly contoured face. She shrank back against her chair, her hands instinctively flying to her stomach. I didn't stop until I reached the very front of the room, standing directly between the stage and the front row where Gregory Hayes sat. Gregory, a silver-haired man with a stern, intimidating presence, was staring intently at the black binder resting on his lap. He looked up, his eyes locking onto mine, a storm of fury brewing behind his spectacles. He gave me a single, barely perceptible nod. He had read the files. He knew. I looked up at Arthur. The microphone picked up his ragged, panicked breathing. "Hello, Arthur," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the dead-silent ballroom. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but you kept insisting we needed to settle our affairs, and I figured this was the perfect audience for transparency." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute and suffocating. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet of the Wilshire Grand Ballroom. Over 200 pairs of eyes darted between my battered, blood-red figure standing in the aisle and Arthur's frozen, pale face on the brightly lit stage. Arthur's grip on the podium tightened so fiercely his knuckles turned entirely white. He fumbled with the microphone, a shrill whine of feedback echoing through the speakers before he managed to stammer out a response. "Madeline? What on earth are you doing here?" He tried to force a sympathetic, condescending smile, addressing the crowd rather than me. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. My ex-wife suffered a severe traumatic brain injury during the estate collapse last month. She's terribly confused, heavily medicated, and clearly needs medical attention. Security, please escort her to the lobby gently." Two burly security guards at the back of the room began to step forward. "The only thing injured that night, Arthur, was your sense of humanity." I projected my voice, loud and unwavering, halting the guards in their tracks. "And for the record, my brain is functioning perfectly, which is how I was able to track the exact routing numbers you used to steal from this firm." A collective gasp ripped through the audience. "Security! Get her out of here now!" Arthur shrieked, his polished facade violently cracking. He was sweating profusely, the stage lights reflecting off his forehead. Before the guards could take another step, Gregory Hayes stood up from the front row. The silver-haired patriarch didn't need a microphone. His booming, authoritative baritone commanded the room instantly. "Security will remain exactly where they are," Gregory ordered, his voice echoing like thunder. He turned to face the stage, holding the heavy black leather binder I had provided. "Arthur, you have stood on this stage for the last 20 minutes, preaching to our investors about integrity, loyalty, and building a secure future. Yet, I hold in my hands undeniable proof of your absolute treachery." Gregory opened the binder, his eyes blazing with a betrayal that mirrored my own. He began to read aloud, broadcasting Arthur's sins to the entire elite business community. Item 1. Gregory barked. The funneling of $480,000 from the Peterson commercial project into an offshore cryptocurrency account. Item 2. He flipped a page. Forged vendor invoices signed by your junior associate, Evelyn, deliberately obscuring missing capital over the last 14 months. Item 3. Gregory slammed the binder shut. A $3 million gambling deficit owed to an unlicensed syndicate, which you intended to pay off by entirely liquidating your wife's family trust fund. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Investors were shouting, board members were jumping out of their seats, and cameras from the hired media team were suddenly flashing, capturing every second of the spectacular meltdown. Arthur's knees visibly buckled. He leaned heavily against the podium, looking like a trapped animal. He looked down at Evelyn, who was shrinking into her VIP chair, covering her face with her designer clutch. And then, Arthur did exactly what a coward always does. He turned on his partner. "It was her," Arthur screamed into the microphone, pointing a trembling finger directly at Evelyn. "Evelyn is the junior accountant. She cooked the books. She was the one who hid the ledgers and manipulated the escrow accounts. I had no idea the extent of it." Evelyn dropped her clutch, her jaw unhinging in pure, unadulterated shock. "You lying bastard!" she shrieked, struggling to stand up in her heels. You forced me to do it. You said we needed the money for the baby. You said Madeline was a clueless idiot and we would never get caught. Their screaming match was suddenly interrupted by the heavy, authoritative sound of the ballroom's side doors bursting open. 4 uniformed police officers, flanked by 2 detectives in plain clothes, marched directly down the center aisle. Victoria had tipped them off perfectly, timing their arrival with the start of the keynote speech. Arthur Pendleton and Evelyn Harper, the lead detective announced, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. You are both under arrest for grand theft, corporate embezzlement, and wire fraud. The police moved swiftly. As they pulled Arthur down from the stage, wrenching his arms behind his back, he began to sob uncontrollably. The arrogant architect who had demanded my grandfather's money while I lay bleeding was reduced to a weeping, pathetic mess. They grabbed Evelyn next, reading her Miranda rights as she hysterically cursed Arthur's name. As they paraded Arthur down the center aisle toward the exit, the police paused right next to me to clear a path through the stunned crowd. Arthur looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot, mascara from a TV makeup touch-up running down his cheeks. Maddie, please, he whimpered, begging the woman he had stepped over. Please, don't let them do this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I leaned slightly on my mahogany cane, looking down at him with nothing but absolute, freezing indifference. You wanted a clean break, Arthur, I whispered, loud enough for only him to hear. Consider this a shattered one. I turned my back on him and walked toward the exit, the rhythmic thud, click of my cane serving as the final soundtrack to his ruined life. 6 months have passed since the gala. The annulment went through flawlessly, and Victoria ensured my grandfather's trust fund was entirely legally insulated from Arthur's catastrophic debts. Arthur pled guilty to avoid a drawn-out trial and was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary. Evelyn, desperate to avoid giving birth behind bars, turned state's evidence against the illegal gambling syndicate Arthur owed money to. She avoided prison but was hit with crippling restitution fines, permanently stripped of her accounting licenses, and left entirely bankrupt. As for me, I still walk with a slight limp, and I have a jagged scar across my ribs that will never fully fade. But every time I look at it in the mirror, I don't see a victim. I see a survivor. I took the shattered pieces of my worst nightmare and used them to cut out the poison in my life. I am building a new future, entirely on my own terms, and the foundation is completely unbreakable. Thank you so much for following my story to the very end. If you loved this dramatic tale of ultimate revenge and karma, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends to remind them never to cross a strong woman, and subscribe to the channel for more crazy true stories. Thanks for watching. The Fania Setted of those subscribed to the channel. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite part of Arthur's downfall was.